Hi, I'm Benjamin Payne. At the K-12 Education Office at Hillsdale College, we support school founding groups and their efforts to start classical schools across the country. Finding the right leader is one of the first and most important steps to building a successful school. While we do consider experience in education, we seek candidates who exhibit unwavering personal integrity, honesty, courage, and servant-hearted leadership. Perhaps that's you. If you're looking to engage in fulfilling, impactful, and challenging work protecting our nation's future and building up the next generation of virtuous citizens, we'd love to hear from you. I'm looking for strong school leaders right now. Learn more about how you can make a difference at hillsdale.edu/leader. hillsdale.edu/LEADER. That's hillsdale.edu/leader.
Welcome to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, bringing you insight into classical education and its unique emphasis on human virtue and moral character, responsible citizenship, content-rich curricula, and teacher-led classrooms. Now your host, Scot Bertram.
Thanks for listening. The Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast is part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. You also can find more information on topics and ideas discussed on this show at our website, k12.hillsdale.edu. We're joined by Dr. Christopher Matsos. He is Chairman and Associate Professor of Theater here at Hillsdale College. Dr. Matsos, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Scott.
Talking today about the Evening with Julius Caesar performance, which occurred in the middle of the K-12 Summer Conference here on Hillsdale College's campus. For those who are unaware, every summer we welcome, I don't even know the number, dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of teachers and administrators from Hillsdale College K-12 schools across the country for good times and friendship and learning and panel discussions and entertainment and all sorts of things over the span of around 10 days or so with multiple waves of teachers coming through. It's quite the experience here on campus. So part of it now is this Shakespeare Summer Workshop. And this year was the second time that had been attempted. Tell us a little about the goal of the Shakespeare Summer Workshop and how that all got started.
Yes, so I had the privilege of working with teachers from the K-12 Hillsdale Network for about 5 years, and I have led them in workshops and just communicated with them over the course of the academic year to understand what challenges they're going through as they build drama programs in their schools. And I had been very fortunate to work with the Royal Shakespeare Company for a couple of years, and specifically with their education department. And they have a huge thing in the UK that we worked to bring to the US. And then that kind of went away. This was, going on 15 years ago. And I thought this group of teachers who are, I think, the best in the country deserve that knowledge, deserve some of that experience. And so I started introducing them to some of that work I had done with RSC. And it was received pretty well by teachers in our workshops. And so I talked with Dr. Katie O'Toole and asked if maybe we could do a kind of demonstration of the principles of this work for the larger conference. And she readily agreed. And so the goal was simply to give a demonstration that would go beyond a limited, 90-minute workshop, and also to make a kind of a statement, if you will, to the whole community about what a theater production can look like, and to kind of dispel some of the misconceptions about what it has to look like. So it was a sort of wonderful experimental pedagogy demonstration that we started last year that we were fortunate to continue into this year.
So, big question, where do you find your actors? Who's taking part?
Yes, well, the Dr. O'Toole suggested we use students from Hillsdale Academy, and that was a magnificent suggestion. And so we work with the fine arts director there, Gail Mowry, and she sets us up with students. We just open it up to anyone who wants to participate. We'll take 30, we'll take 5. And we really just say, okay, June 2nd, we'll begin. Whoever is here is here. And 2 years in a row now, we've had around 15 students both years. And so we work with who we have. And it's a completely unorthodox theater experience. We don't, all we have with us is an edited version of a Shakespeare play, and we don't even know who will be what role. We know nothing about it. We simply ask these students to trust us, and we trust them, and we engage in a bunch of very active physical, but also highly intellectual activities to dive very deeply into the themes and characters and plot of a play. After a few days, they know the play inside and out. And so at the end of the first of 2 weeks, we hand out some roles, and then a week later, we perform the play.
You've got, as you mentioned, a very limited amount of time after the school year ends, before the K-12 summer conference begins, around 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. How do you do this? Study, rehearse, and then eventually perform even a truncated Shakespeare play in just the limited amount of time that you have to work with these actors?
Yes. Well, it is very limited, but also the script we use is pretty limited. I mean, we did, I edit the play down to about maybe half or a third of its original length, and then we decide which scenes from that are going to most effectively tell the themes of the plot that the students have been most engaged with over the week. So it ends up being maybe 25 pages of text, which is still a lot, but it's not like we're setting out to do the entire play. But what we do is we introduce the plot first, without reading the entire script of the play. So last year we did The Tempest. This year was Julius Caesar. And we do an activity that we call the whoosh. And you stand everyone in a circle and you just tap people and make them jump in the circle as you read a summary of the play, and they have to act out what you say. And it looks almost nothing like the real play, but it creates this kind of experience for them, and they love it. It's fun. And by the end, they know the plot. And then from there, we look at the individual scenes, and we just, again, stand in a circle and we read them in a very specific kind of way. And the only rule is, as we read the scenes, you must raise your hand if there's a word or something you don't understand. So we really go through the scenes with a fine-tooth comb. And by the end of the first few days, they know these scenes intimately. And more importantly than knowing them, they feel like they own them in a way. They feel like they have a right to them. And so I guess I would submit that the real key is helping students to feel like Shakespeare can belong to them. And once they have that, they're so enthusiastic, it's like you can't hold them back. And then they say, "Oh, I'll be Brutus. I'll be Cassius. I want to be, our excellent young man who was one of the Julius Caesars said, I will play Julius Caesar, but only if I get to be assassinated." And that was my favorite line of the 2 weeks. So, yeah.
What do you hope that teachers and administrators who view these performances take away after seeing what the students do and what you're able to help them to do in this short amount of time? That
theater doesn't need to be some of the preconceptions that people take away from often limited experience. We don't see much live theater these days. We might see a tour coming through town or go to a community theater, and often the focus is on spectacle. And spectacle is the most expensive and the hardest to do. And it's great, But if you can't pull it off, that shouldn't be an impediment to doing it at all. So we have a very strict budget of $150 that we stuck with, except this year we spent $151. So we went over budget. But
have to fundraise to get the rest.
We
right?
will. It's going to be. But so one thing is just that we hope to illustrate that, the students wore for this performance, they wore black. They wore a black top, anything they owned, black pants and a black shirt. And then on top of that, we made really kind of rudimentary, what looked like Roman sashes, garments of different colors. And they were just bits of fabric that we folded in a nice way and pinned. And each one was a color. And so each color represented a character. So at the beginning, we had a narrator say, "This is Julius Caesar." So the actor held up the purple color and put it on. And so we hope to show that, first of all, it can be done inexpensively. It can be done in a very pragmatic way. You can add a narrator who explains what's going on if you're not relying strictly on Shakespeare's text. And also that it can, we don't need to have stars. We don't need to have people who are bound for Broadway, even though I think some of these students might be if they're interested. This is an ensemble effort. That's probably the most important lesson. Ensemble, building a team over the course of your rehearsal. Everyone knowing every part of how the story is told so that anybody can be Brutus, anybody can be Julius Caesar. We had a moment where, we said, Caesar's wife has this dream that's like a prophetic dream. And we said, how could we illustrate that? So all of the students got on stage and enacted different parts of her dream. And we ended up keeping that in the show. So I guess letting imagination, letting the text, and letting the students' active investigation of the text be the thing that is ultimately seen by the public, that's what we hoped to show.
In an expedited process like this, how much does the students' suggestions and their feel for the work end up in the final product?
Quite a bit. Now, with this one, since it was shorter, we reach a certain threshold where we say, okay, we've heard all of the ideas. Now we're going to make some decisions. And that might be me talking a little bit more than you all just sort of brainstorming. So we did reach that point, but that was just a few days before the performance itself. So really most of it was guided by, we would offer the parameters of an exercise, and then they would do the exercise, and a lot of what they came up with out of that inspired what was in, or simply directly was, that exercise happening on stage. So it was a good, probably 75% of what they discovered was seen by the audience.
What do you think that you've learned from now 2 years working with Hillsdale Academy students on this Shakespeare Summer Workshop experience?
What I've tried to do is put myself in the position of one of the teachers that will have limited time, limited resources, and just to see what I could discover. And I've learned that it is possible to do it with very little. I've learned that the students are the process, and that we as teachers, if we're directing a play, directing doesn't mean imposing some sort of concept on what we're doing or having to have every move thought out. It's much more liberated than that. It can come directly from the enthusiasm and engagement of the students. Even in the classroom or at the rehearsal, what they discover is what we need to see. If you over-rehearse something or are robotic about it and rehearsals become like drills, the students, all you will see are the students on the stage trying to remember exactly. But if you don't worry about that, if you let it be an exploration and let it be physical and imaginative and guided by the text and by their enthusiasm, you'll see their enthusiasm. And then it's like, you've won. They've won. So, yeah.
What have you perhaps heard directly from those actors, those Hillsdale Academy students from the past 2 years? What they liked, what they didn't like, suggestions for year number 3, perhaps?
Yes, it's that I should say that each performance last year and this ended with a Q&A, and these students were not coached, and the audience was asked to just ask questions. And so the students get to stand up and talk about what they've learned. And so they say things like, I never knew I could do this. I'm not really an actor. I'm a backstage person, or I've never had a leading role before. So they make comments like that. They marvel at how quickly they were able to put it together. They talk about how deeply they appreciate the text now, more so than when they simply read it. So they say things like that. There have been students that say, now, next year, we should do a fuller production. We should have more weeks and bigger scenery, and we should have more to it. And that's certainly something to consider. But I think that at least in its initial phase here of the last few years of a kind of demonstration of what we can do, I think it's been successful in that way.
Dr. Christopher Matsos is chairman and associate professor of theater here at Hillsdale College. It also organizes this Shakespeare summer workshop during our K-12 summer conferences here on campus. Dr. Matsos, thanks so much for joining us here on the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast.
Thank you very much.
I'm Scot Bertram. We invite you to like us on Facebook. Search for Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education. You also can follow us on Instagram at Hillsdale_K12. Hillsdale_K12 on Instagram. Thank you for listening to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio.